First of all, welcome. It's wonderful to see you all here. My name is Carl Arnold, and like I'm sure all of you, we are all overextended and over-affiliated. My first group was in CDOG, Chenango, Delaware, Otsego Gas Drilling Opposition Group. I'm also a member of NYH2O and Sierra Club and the Green Party. A brief overview of what's brought us here. A year ago, as far as I could see, this whole issue was still under the radar, even though hundreds of us around the state had been working for at least a year and a half, sometimes 2 years, to get the word out. And, but around that time, a couple of things happened. One member of CDOG wrote a draft ban bill, and I worked on it too, and then in April and May, I gave it to a number of state legislators who were very interested, one of whom, a state senator, had already come out several months before for a statewide ban. In May and June, everybody was anticipating the film Gasland, which of course was broadcast for a week on HBO. So that was one increment. And at the same time, the enthusiasm for a moratorium took hold, which led to several weeks of very intense lobbying in August for the Senate, and this remarkable result came out, 48-9 in favor of the moratorium. And that was bipartisan, it was upstate, downstate. These were very good signals, far more important, I think, than the moratorium itself. We also had some, and of course then the Assembly finally got around to it in November, and we know the rest. We also had some negative help from the Gulf of Mexico and most recently Fukushima. The two latest increments were the New York Times articles, which seemed to up the ante. And of course, in the last couple of days, we've seen the Howarth and Grafia Santoro article, which has already made a splash, as far as I've heard, around the world. We're here, of course, because everybody in this room wants a ban. We understand it deeply enough that that is the only thing that we can live with and that will allow us to live. Of course, the other thread in the movement is the regulatory approach. And as much as we may not like it, in my view anyway, those are our allies and they have to continue to be our allies, because ultimately what we're talking about when we talk about a ban is a piece of legislation in Albany. So those are the guys we have to deal with. Do people know who Tony Avella is, new state senator? So he introduced a ban bill. No co-sponsors, didn't know about any allies, but he took leadership. He did it. And now some people are signing on who wouldn't have the energy, let's say, to do it themselves. But people are starting to come around. And in the legislative session, if anybody's interested, I'll talk more about him and some other state legislators that we've met with. So, and also, by the way, there will be a companion bill in the Assembly, but we don't know who it is yet, but someone is seriously preparing that. Of course, at the same time, corporate pushback is increasing, no surprise. I don't know what's going on in the southern tier. Since the last couple of months I spent mostly in the city, but certainly there are constant TV ads on the regular channels, on cable, newspapers, magazines. Of course, showing how clean and wonderful gas is, the fuel of the future, and energy independence, and all the other myths that we know about. And probably as we speak, the deep pockets are trying to buy yet more politicians and judges. How many people here know what GSGI is? Just
you mean the GSGI?
GSGI, a Global Shale Gas Initiative. A year ago, when Obama made yet another policy statement favoring gas, and I think specifically hydrofracking, the Department of State established an agency, the Global Shale Gas Initiative, and Google GSGI, you'll get it right away. It's an agency specifically to promote hydrofracking around the world, especially for China and India. So they're up and running. And as everybody here knows, most of the NGOs, including unfortunately still the Sierra Club, we're working on national, are still equivocating one way or another about a ban. They're not ready to come out for that yet, and that part of our job is to make them. So we don't have critical mass yet, but what we do have is momentum. And it's really, really clear, just in the last few months, how things have changed enormously. And I think we can all take tremendous encouragement from that. An example, people have heard about the Spectra pipeline, probably most everybody. For those who don't know, they want to put a pipeline from, I think it's the Millennium, I'm not sure, an extension under Jersey City, under the Hudson, into lower Manhattan. Remember the explosions recently in Pennsylvania, then there was San Bruno in California, and these things apparently are constant when you look at the detailed record. So that's what they want to do, and Mayor Bloomberg, of course, as we suspected for a couple of years, thinks he can get the gas and the clean water, and he doesn't get it, that he can only have one, not both. And we know a choice we want to pressure him to make. But he supported the Spectra pipeline. The point I'm getting at is that within days of finding this out, because of the momentum that we already have, a group of people got together, some are in this room, and immediately formed a new group to fight the pipeline. And they got organized so quickly and so smartly, and I think within a week or two, correct me Claire if I'm wrong, there was a website up, and people had found out that they could be interveners, and so the instructions were passed around, and it got done so quickly that I don't know how many were signed up as interveners, 500? 500 within what, 2 weeks, Heidi? And in the last couple of days, the Speaker of the New York City Council, Christine Quinn, signed as an intervener. The Manhattan Borough President, Scott Stringer, signed as an intervener, and I don't know who else did. And that was because of all the work that's been done in the last couple of years that enabled that group to form so quickly, understand the issue, and act. If you want to testify at the hearings, there was a time period in which you could register to do so, and the official term is to become an intervener. And whether or not you decide to testify, the fact that so many people signed as interveners was an initial signal to the federal FERC. Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, thank you. I'm fairly good with acronyms, but I don't have all of them down yet. And so over 500 people signed, including some of those fairly well-known officials. So that was a terrific move. People probably know about the list, growing list of businesses and medical societies who are against fracking. And some of us are working on unions and churches, other civic groups. This is all part of the momentum that's building. Thank you. If anybody's interested, I've compiled what I'm sure is an incomplete list of bans and moratoriums, not just around the state. I think we've got 8 or 9 counties, a bunch of towns. We all know about Pittsburgh and Buffalo. And some people have been following what's going on in Australia. And by the way, the French government is supporting a bill to ban hydrofracking in France. Who'd have thunk? And a couple of months ago in Blackpool in the north of England, there was the first meeting of local people to resist the first frack there. I don't know if it's happened yet. Poland, it has a few months ago. Germany is scheduled. They're trying to do it all over the world, of course. Anyway, this 5-page incomplete list is available if anybody wants to see it. So a whole lot of people couldn't be here today. Just a couple of very quick quotes from Renee Fogelsang from Syracuse. Instead of being here today, she says, "I will not be attending the conference because I will be in New York City and then Washington, D.C. for Power Shift. We will be mobilizing thousands of students for a statewide and national ban on fracking. There are 900 students coming from New York State alone." Who we plan to plug into this movement. And is Lindsay Spear here? There's Lindsay, hi. So Lindsay knows more about this, and if anybody wants to know in the copious time of 30 seconds in between one thing and another, you can speak with her about it. And we got a beautiful two-page report from Carol Roig and a couple of others in Sullivan County, and just a couple of lines from it, because it's very long, but just a couple of lines. "Activists are working to uncover potential conflicts of interest among our legislators and the unelected boards of various county-funded industrial development and economic development agencies that promoted tax breaks for the expansion of the Millennium Pipeline and actively promote gas drilling on their taxpayer-sponsored websites and publications." So people are doing all sorts of great things across the state. The world is looking at us. I'd just like to close by saying this movement is about nothing less than survival, about preserving our lives, saving our butts, and making sure that the natural systems that sustain us all continue to do so. We're here today to up the ante and to focus more sharply on how to accomplish that. We need to build our momentum into critical mass. So let's get to work.
Good morning. My name's Mary Jo Long, and I don't know which program you have. I'm supposed to speak at two different topics, and so the one that I'm going to address first was the later topic in the early agenda. So I'm going to talk right now about what are lawyers for. And one of the reasons I guess I got nominated or talked into discussing this topic is, first of all, I am a lawyer for over 33 years. And I've also taught law, and when I was teaching law, I was training lawyers. I ran a clinical legal program at Case Western Reserve University Law School, taking law students in their last year of law school and actually taking them to court and having them draft legal documents and interview clients and that sort of stuff. And so it made me stand back a little bit and look at what the proper role of lawyers is. And even though I haven't been teaching law for a real long time now, that orientation stayed with me. I also, by the way, I live in Afton, New York, which is in Shenango County, a fairly small, rural, poor county that's near Binghamton. And 5 years ago, I was elected to the Afton Town Board. A year ago, I got reelected and have been very involved in a local road use law that I'm going to talk about in the later session. But this morning, I really want to talk about what is a good role that lawyers can play and how they can help. And I say that because sometimes in movements, and this one sometimes, I think there's a tendency or a desire to over-rely on attorneys to help you make the problem go away. And, it isn't limited to this movement. Over the years, as I've been involved in many issues, activists will come to me and say, well, can't you sue them? Doesn't the 14th Amendment prevent this? There's got to be some law, some magic formula that will solve this problem, to look to the law and attorneys and judges and courts as a way of solving the problem. And people don't like my answer, because the answer is there is no magic formula. Lawyers can help in many important ways, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but I have seen times when over-reliance on attorneys through a lawsuit to solve the problem result in a diffusion of energy, and activists and supporters spend more time raising money to pay the lawyers' fees than going out and organizing locally. And so it's important to know what is a good role for an attorney and how to work with attorneys and how to judge what attorneys say when, when they're involved, either for or against what you're trying to do. Obviously, lawyers can be helpful in many ways. They can, if your well water's polluted, you go to a lawyer to sue those who are responsible. Lawyers can help draft local legislation. They can represent towns if they've been sued, claiming that their legislation is overbroad or not legal. Lawyers will probably come to represent people who have been charged with vandalizing property or trespassing if they're on property trying to monitor some kind of gas drilling activity. There are all sorts of ways that lawyers will be useful. But we're tools. And I'm a gardener, so the tools I think of as, for some plants you need to dig up, you use a trowel. For a bigger plant, if it's a tree, you might need a backhoe. And so lawyers will help you like a trowel or a backhoe. They are a tool to help you accomplish the task. But it is the muscle of the activists and workers who are necessary to drive that tool in a direction that's helpful. And very seldom do lawsuits resolve the whole problem, although lawsuits are almost always involved in the process of dealing with the problem. The great problems of our society, such as slavery, the change, the abolition of slavery, the expansion of the vote to include former slaves and black people, to include women, all of those things didn't come through lawsuits. They came through the efforts of people changing public opinion, expanding the agenda of what seemed politically possible. And yet there are great lawsuits that have helped. Brown versus the Board of Education was a massive effort. The case that declared separate but equal schools was unconstitutional. That happened in 1954. It interpreted the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which was passed in 1868. So it took, and the courts changed their interpretation to change the law by 1954. And no matter how brilliant the lawyers were, and they were, I mean, Thurgood Marshall and the NAACP Legal Defense Fund organized a strategy and a campaign about how to attack this problem of school segregation. And it went through many lawsuits and created, led to a very good result. But that lawsuit and the winning of that lawsuit in the Supreme Court didn't happen in isolation from the massive efforts of civil rights activists, their laborious work, sometimes violent confrontations, and that activist work is what made it, what shifted public opinion and made the political space for the Supreme Court and judges to make that change. A lesson I have said, well, in fact, I will say, when I first became a lawyer, I was in New York City, and I took the New York bar exam in 1977. And 2 years later is when I moved to Cleveland, Ohio, and started teaching. And so in order to practice law in Ohio, I had to take the Ohio bar exam 2 years after the New York bar exam. And by the time I took the Ohio bar exam and I would read some of the questions, and you know, some of them were multiple choice and some essay, and I would look at the options and I would say, the correct answer is, it depends on what judge you have. That was not one of the options in the multiple choice, but having practiced law, I had learned, only 2 years at that point, I had learned that lesson. And you need to remember that. The law is what the judges say it is. And so right now, judges are comfortable upholding the current legal system, which ranks corporate privileges higher than community conditions, whether it's environmental threats, health impacts, or trying to develop sustainable economic activity. But courts are subject to public pressure, even if they're not elected. And they have shifted their interpretations, as I've discussed in terms of school segregation. And so lawyers who represent people will be helpful in helping in one of the channels of influencing the direction in which we're going to go toward a ban. I kind of made a list, and it's not in any particular order of importance, but I kind of wanted you to know, first of all, practical stuff. I talked about the historical, now the practical. First of all, keep in mind, when lawyers talk about gas drilling, there are more lawyers who work for the gas companies and the pro-gas drillers than lawyers who are helping and working with the people who are against hydrofracking. And I say gas drilling, I mean, there's some distinctions. I'm really kind of referring to the high volume horizontal hydraulic fracturing, which has not yet happened here in New York State. And that's in part because lawyers are, in law school, they're trained to be hired guns. The dominant ideology that lawyers are trained at in law school is to not ask what is the right outcome. Law students who ask that question in law school are ridiculed for caring about the outcome. They are trained to believe, and it is in their economic interest, of course, to do that, that they don't have to ask what's right, what's just. They have to zealously represent their client and believe that the judicial process and the legal process generates justice from that. And it doesn't take too many years of doing that to recognize that that isn't the case. Money talks louder and all that. But so when I've been in meetings where, one of the very first meetings on gas drilling that I went to 3 years ago, arrived a little late. It was more for municipal officials, and I was a town board member. And you know, they have the panel of experts at the front of the room, and one of them is a lawyer, and a supervisor in I think it was the town of Highland, said something about, well, we passed a moratorium. And the lawyer up at the front said, oh, you can't do that. And I hear that every once in a while from lawyers. And anytime you hear a lawyer say, oh, you can't do that, you have to question that immediately. That is not what a lawyer is supposed to say if the lawyer is on your side. That is what a lawyer says if they're on the other side. Lawyers are trained. You don't say, my client would rather that you not do that. They say, oh, you can't do that. And they will, and the lawyer's job, and it is our ethical obligation, to marshal as many arguments as you can for the side you're representing. And I will talk a little bit more about that in terms of the substantive arguments like regulatory takings and some things that are beginning to be said by lawyers and then repeated by other people. And those kinds of statements are aimed to discourage people from being activists because it's much easier on the lawyer and his or her client if you say, oh, I can't do that? Oh, okay. I guess I have to ask nicer or whatever it is. So that's one of the first ones I jotted down into sort of thinking about how to deal with lawyers. Another one is threatening to sue. It's easy to threaten to sue. I'm going to sue you. We're going to sue you. You're going to get sued. I've been told that in my town board because we're working on this road preservation law. Oh, you're going to get sued. It's going to cost so much money. On and on and on. Remember, either if it's the lawyer or somebody parroting the language and message of the lawyer, it's easy to claim to sue. It's a much harder thing to actually do it. It costs a lot of money, and lawyers don't usually do it for free. So take it with a grain of salt when they threaten to sue. And in general, my perspective is that the lawyer's role is to try to help the client accomplish the goal, not to define the goal. If someone, I'm going to take it out of the gas drilling context because I don't know how it will necessarily come out in there. But if there's some recently sit-down strikes in, what was that, Michigan or Illinois? A company was going bankrupt and they weren't paying their workers. They were owed wages for work they'd already done, and the company's saying, well, we don't have the money. And the workers actually just occupied the factory they worked in. They sat down. Now, if you asked a lawyer, a lawyer would say, well, that's illegal. You can't do that. All right? But a lawyer who's representing those workers would say, well, it's a violation of this law, and if they arrest you, you get charged. Sort of tell you the consequences of your action, but not tell you that you can't do it, because sometimes. I've been involved in movements where there's been civil disobedience. The civil rights movement in the South. In my child, I was a child watching television while children and adults were violating the law. They were sitting in segregated lunch counters where they weren't allowed. So sometimes you do things and you don't really want the lawyer just saying, oh no, you can't possibly do that because it's illegal. You want the lawyer to advise you of the consequences, but you have to decide what you're going to do. And so lawyers should be helping you create the best arguments they can for the side. The rights of nature may be the way we'll go eventually, as opposed to the rights of corporations. I hope so. And so lastly, in terms of how we deal with the pro-gas people, I think one of my most common sayings to clients, and sometimes to myself, is you never get anything if you don't ask. So, and really demand. You never want to negotiate with yourself. Don't say, I want a ban, but I can never get it, so I'm only going to ask for a moratorium for 5 years. Because when you reduce your demand, they're going to actually come back with something less than that. Oh, you only want a moratorium for 5 years? Well, we'll give you a moratorium for a year. You only want preventing gas drilling in New York City watershed. Okay, well, we'll give you, they'll always, you'll never get more than what you ask. They don't do it that way. So you have to be very clear about what you're demanding, and I've experienced it. I've had times when I, as the attorney for a client, I want to settle the case. I want to, have the bird in the hand versus the possibility of having a poorer outcome after trial or this or that. And I've learned that when my clients demand more, I end up getting them more. Because I can't settle a case, ethically, I can't settle a case. I can't give in without my client's permission. So, I'm telling you all, hang in there, okay? All right. I think if you hold, in terms of questions, I think, oh, I do, okay. So if there's a question, go ahead.
John Cosma, Sustainable Otsego, Fly Creek, New York. I know nothing about the township you represent. The question I have is, why are they concentrating on road use laws rather than concentrating on banning heavy industry, of which gas operations is a part?
The quick answer is where we're at politically in our little town. And actually, the later presentation I'm going to make is going to be talking about some of those dynamics. We're greatly encouraged to see other towns making more radical demands.
That would be us.
Yes, which is you. And I think that, like Ben Price, who's going to be making the next presentation, will be talking about, you know, how well, I think he'll address that to some extent. And also, for us in little town of Afton, there are still quite a few people who see dollar signs in their future, and they hope that this is the, you know, the economic salvation of their financial difficulties. And so it's taken some time for people to learn that even the ones who have enough land and have leased or want to lease may not be benefiting. And so we're still going through an education process in our little town. But it's a good question, and it's a part of a broader discussion, which I do want to have to talk more about, but maybe in the context of the powers of local government, which is something I'm going to talk about a little later. Okay? Yes.
Hi, David Baker, Walton, New York. Do we have to start focusing as a movement on the judiciary that's going to be deciding these cases down the road?
No, I mean, my opinion is we have to be focused on grassroots organizing. They will follow. I mean, judges in New York are elected, although they serve very long terms, and so there could be some long-term strategies about you know, judges supporting judicial candidates, but they try to insulate judges from these issues, and I think it's easier to influence elected, like government officials, town boards, county boards, and all that. I mean, that's my gut sense.